All right, welcome everybody to our Siyum on Avodah Zara. Before we get started, and I know that this was Labor Day, so this was, Labor Day weekend, so it was not necessarily the most convenient time for many of our co-learners, so a lot of people are gonna have to watch the recording of this, but we decided to do it this week because we're gonna have another Siyum in about 2 weeks for Haraya, which is the shortest Masechet and gonna be there before you know it. The Siyum this week is going to be dedicated for the refuah of 2 people. One of our co-learners, Claire Burkhardt-Zwirling, her Hebrew name is Basia Bat Hilda, and we wish her a full refuah. She's unfortunately unable to listen to us today, but she will hopefully listen to the recording and know that many of us are wishing her well and hoping that she has a complete refuah. And also for my mother, Barbara Osman, Bela Freda Bat Henya Minya. I think some of you may know that my mother, unfortunately, has been sort of in and out of the hospital for the last few months, and she had a major surgery this past Wednesday. And thank God she seems to be on her way to recovery, but it's going to be a long road. And so we wish her a complete refuah as well. And so with that, we'll just do first a couple of introductory comments. I think many of you have seen, and you're welcome to share some thoughts in the chat as well, and tell us where you're logging in from. Ann and I loved this Masechet. We thought it was great, really different than some of the other things we've seen. And I think really gave us sort of some insight into how people lived in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, relationships with non-Jews. I think to particularly be learning this Masechet, where I think, at least for me personally, maybe this will resonate with some people, many of us, I think, are starting to question sort of our Jewish place in the world, our relationship with non-Jews in a way that I think our generation, or maybe people a little older than me, have never experienced before. And so I think it's raised sort of a lot of, I think it has sort of raised some interesting questions for many of us. And at least that's been my perspective on this particular Masechet. And I think all the topics of Yain Nesach at the end were especially interesting. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I like that it is in many ways a departure from the regular topics of Nezikin, even though it overlaps with them you talk about property damage and the way that something being contaminated by idolatry ends up being property damage. I found that to be a very interesting wrinkle. We understand, I think, perhaps why it's in Seder Nezikin and also why it's at the end, because it's not the regular fare. And I think that a lot of the narrative throughout the Masechet shed light on real live cases in ways that we've seen a lot of case law throughout. And this time, I think we saw a lot of case law that seemed to be grounded all the more so in the potential for it to be real cases, the kinds of questions that come to the fore when you're keeping halacha and what are you supposed to do next. So I found all of this also to be very, very powerful, very interesting Gemara. I think we're gonna begin. Your
Yeah, we're
Dana?
going to start with our poem. I'm going to pin Leanne. And we want to thank Leanne, always for being our resident our resident poet for Talking Talmud. I really think we're the only group of co-learners who can say that, so that's pretty amazing. And let me just pin you also, because this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to have it sort of an interactive, it's an interactive poem this time. So I just want to have both of you on the screen. So just give me a minute to find Anne here. I'm having trouble with my
And while you're doing that, I'll just give the introduction then. So farewell to Masechet Avodah Zara, one of my very favorites of these past 5 years. So much that was so pertinent. And I also loved the first 20 pages because they were just so very beautiful. I'm only focusing today on one page. And although it's not representative of the entire Masechet, I think it's pertinent to each one of us sitting here today. I think we all have our own Avodah Zara Daf 19a story. This is just my Daf Avodah Zara 19a story, but you all have your own. So listen with that in mind and maybe think about that afterwards. Okay, Anne. Take it away.
I'm privileged, I feel, Leanne, to participate in your poem. I will be reading the interspersed sections that Leanne has directed me to read as we go. Avodah Zara, Daf 19a. The Gemara cites other statements relating to Torah study. Rava says that Rav Sechora says that Rav Huna says, what is the meaning of that which is written? Wealth gotten through vanity, mihevel, shall be diminished, but he that gathers little by little shall increase. Proverbs 13:11. If a person turns his Torah into many bundles, chavilot, by studying large amounts in a short period of time without reviewing, his Torah will diminish. But if he gathers his knowledge little by little, by studying slowly and reviewing, his knowledge shall increase.
2020. One learner among many, motives unarticulated in a suburban East Coast town, quiet streets lined with maples and oaks, while a strange sickness swiftly spreads continent to continent, town to town. It is 6:30 a.m. A woman exits a yellow front door, clutches a leash attached to a sniffing dog. Is it even okay to learn the daf while walking your dog? She inserts her earbuds and begins her daf yomi walk. What does she know? Nothing. Where does she start? I guess it's right here, right now. Unfamiliar terms exit her phone, spraying like mist into her ear. Talks of blessing and prayer, the Shema, drought, and fasts. This rabbi speaks, and then another. Who are they? She doesn't understand how one always credits another. And then
Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, a person can learn Torah only from a place in the Torah that his heart desires, as it is stated, but his delight is in the Torah of the Lord. That is, his delight is in the part of the Torah that he wishes to study.
2021, 2022. The walks continue. In and out of deserted streets they wander, this woman and her spotted, stubborn dog. Her companions are in her ear. Her teachers talk and carefully explain. There are many voices. Rabbi Akiva, the voice of the Gemara, Rav Sheshet, Rav Dimi, the rich rabbi, the fat rabbi, the blind rabbi. And there are also sea monsters and demons, wealthy Roman women, Babylonians, soldiers and perfumers, spirits in the water who glide deep into the night. There are mothers and maids, and man and his many needs.
And Rava also says, with regard to this verse, initially the Torah is called by the name of the Holy One, blessed be He, but ultimately it is called by the name of the one who studies it.
2023, 2024. Days pass, months pass into a blur. Both the woman and her dog grow a little older. Rain and ice and early morning sunrises, in the heat of the summer and in the birth of the spring, and an unspeakable event in Israel. Chaos and suffering, chaos and suffering. But on the daf, Yomi walks, there is quiet learning. Hat pulled over her ears, earbuds plugged, the dog's daily meanderings. Keep walking, lady. Over time, her ears have become more familiar to the voices of her teachers, who share the rabbi's disagreements, the many cases, ancient recipes and cures, disagreements and proofs, men sitting around a table in a discussion that lasts for centuries. About what? Architecture, lots of tithes, measurements and distances, witnesses and damages, sex and divorce, category after category, term after term, fly into her earbuds. Slowly, though, the words begin to make sense, gain context. Ashera, Aguna, Asmachta, Yain, Nesech, Nevela, Nolad. Her favorite is Teku. She loves a Teku. So many more beyond her reach, so very many more. Still, they walk onward.
Anyone who learns Torah from one teacher alone never sees a sign of blessing, as it is necessary to acquire knowledge from many teachers.
Masechtot, some endless, some fly by. She finally learns what Baba Kama means. The dog leads, sniffing out the world. She follows, sometimes wondering why bother. And then something comes up in the text, something small or strange or just outrageous. And she wonders, why was this written? Is this so strange? What a privilege. She hopes that she can remember these words. Status and more status, permitted and forbidden, the sea and the sky, forbidden water and food and sales and business. And as the summer wanes in 2025, lots of talk of wine. She forgets most, but some she remembers, just enough to want to do it all over again. And Rava says, with regard to Torah study, a person should always study and review, even though he may afterward forget, and even though he does not understand what it is saying. Teku, we shall see.
It is written with regard to the Torah, quote, in the top of high places, and is written in the continuation of the verse that the Torah is, quote, by the path. This contradiction is resolved as follows. Initially, a person studies Torah in a private location, in the top of high places, but ultimately he will spread his knowledge by the path in the public realm.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this will bring you to your own Daf 19a. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne, as always, wonderful. And hopefully we'll hear from you again in about 2 weeks. I know it's not a lot of time. Thank you very, very much. Okay. And now I would like to introduce our speaker, Professor Chaim Saman, who's spoken with us before. Just to remind everybody, he is a professor of law and the chair in Jewish law at Villanova University at their School of Law. He's a scholar of Jewish law, insurance law, and private law, and has published the book Halacha, The Rabbinic Idea of Law, with Princeton University Press. Some of you maybe have been following him on Facebook, where he's been posting some very interesting things about his observations of Avodah Zara. If I could be as bold as to say, I think you enjoyed this Masechet as much as many of us did as well. I'm just gonna unmute you. There, you can unmute yourself, Chaim. Yeah, great.
All right, for me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. And I think I was here for either Sanhedrin or Makos. So as Yardena said, I've been so I want to be full disclosure to some Masechet. I spent a lot of time learning with my Charusa a number of years ago, and I decided, okay, I'll review a Daf Yomi, and then I said, maybe I'll write something as it comes up, and then it became a full-time job. Sort of trying to write something every day or every other day. So that's where we are. So as I think about this Masechet, the truth is a number of the themes that were brought up already, I think very much resonate. Maybe just start with something that's a little more marginal, but something that has interested me a lot as I've thought about it, again. And as was mentioned, I'm a law professor, and I teach sort of private law topics, contracts, property, things like that. And one of the things that's very interesting in this Masechet and really elsewhere is just how much Isser v'heter law, prohibited and permitted law, is bound up in contract and property law. And you saw this especially in the Ayin Nesach Sugyas towards the end, right? That one's, I would say, legal ownership or legal rights to either the wine or the idols, if we're earlier in the Masechta, very, very much drives the Isser. Similar, of course, to Chametz, right? In which, even though a pshat reading of the Torah would say that lo yira'eh v'lo yimatzeh, right? It's about seeing and sort of finding in your domain or in your area, which doesn't speak in ownership categories. It speaks in maybe access categories or just visual categories. But for Chazal, they say, no. Shelcha I ataroa, but shelacher mataroa. Right? In other words, you're allowed to, see non-Jews chametz in your house, and you're not allowed to own chametz even if it's unseen or inaccessible. So one of the very interesting things that, I don't know, it might be a future research project for me, just think sort of system-wide. of the degree to which Isser v'Heter is sort of driven by ownership categories. And again, that's very much a theme in the last 15 or so daf. Just to the Masechta as a whole, to me, there's like two main axes. One, if we think about the Gemara itself, right, that the Talmud is a text, and one if we think about as the halacha that emerges from it. And maybe I'll start with the halacha part and then go to the Gemara part. So it has been said, and I think even before, but Chaim Soloveitchik made this famous. This is Rabbeinu Tam's Masechta, and the Balei HaTosfos really. Now at Daf Yomi speed, it's hard to catch all the Tosfos, but more here than anywhere else, and I say the Tosfos and Rabbeinu Tam sort of more than anybody, basically just restructures and reorganizes this Masechta in very powerful ways and very interesting ways. Maybe we'll say a word or two about how Rabbeinu Tam is even different. Someone mentioned the first 20 daf, right? Those basically deal with commercial and then social-ish relationships with non-Jews. As one learns them, one says, gosh, we don't do any of this really, right? We basically engage in commerce independent of the time of year. If we were to stable our horses, we would probably, I guess, hard to find a non-Jewish stable, I guess here in America anyway. Obviously everything to do with health and refuah and things like that. And really, time after time again, the Balei HaTosfos basically, the marketplaces that have to do with non-Jewish idols. So here's what they don't do. They don't do what I think what our reflex is. Well, they're not really Ovdei Avodah Zara, right? Which is today's non-Jews are right. The Meiri has such a shita basically. Some later Rishonim and certainly the Achronim do, but in the Balei HaTosfos and really in the Rishonim, that's not the theory. Rabbeinu Tam constantly asks the sort of question, which is not a question as he usually does from another Gemara, but from life, from practice. He says, Al ma samchu ha'olam, right? This appears in Daf 2, and it appears in Daf 72. And I don't want to say every Daf in between, but certainly in a variety of places. How does everybody do this? Whether it's how do we have commercial relationships during the holidays? How is it that we seem to we don't drink yain nesach, but we do certain trade in yain nesach? How is it we use church ovens and church mills, right? Over and over and over again, we stable our animals with non-Jews, et cetera, et cetera. We medical treatment, accept and also offer, et cetera. And this sort of question, not from another Gemara, but from practice, is very interesting. And even in the Tosfos, it's a longer story what happens in other Rishonim, but even in the Tosfos, you see two themes. One, I think, represented by the Ri, and one by Rabbeinu Tam. The Ri will typically read the Gemara in a more, I would say, straightforward way, and then either him or the Rashbam, or really from Rashi, that whole school, right? We're here really talking about Ashkenaz as far as a different world. Will say, yes, but what can we do? We're in Galus. They will hate us, mipnei Eva, or Ein Yad Yisrael Tekifa, sort of the Jewish, our in our language, our social political standing is limited, and basically, yes, this is like the ideal halacha, but we can't really fulfill that right now. That's basically the line you get from a number of Balei HaTosfos, really from Rashi already really in the Gaonim a little bit, but I think sort of in the Tosfos on the page, most concentrated in Ri. And almost every time that happens, Rabbeinu Tam doesn't do that. He says, no, that's not what the Gemara means. In other words, he will not allow for a gap between there's an ideal halacha that we should be doing, and then we kind of can't do it, so we do something else. He will say, let me explain to you what the Gemara really means, and then in his view, as an original matter, that was never usher, right? And therefore he does this, I think, I counted about 8 to 10 times, a little bit depending on how you count, throughout the Masechta, which is pretty pretty common then, this sort of move where the other Balei HaTosfot basically, I mean, they don't disagree on the result. There are places where the Ravine Tam also disagrees on the result, but here I'm talking about places where they don't disagree on the result. But for Rabbeinu Tam, he's therefore going to like turn the Gemara upside down so that it never meant the thing that everyone thinks it means, and therefore we can't do. And now it just means something consistent with our practice. Okay, so this shows up on Daf Bet or Beis, where he says that no, all those isurim about commercial transactions are really only for what he calls ma'aseh tikrovet, things that are actually offered. Right, but by the Christian Middle Ages, no one's actually offering animals, so it basically doesn't apply. And then all the way on Daf 73, yesterday's Daf, where he says that the thing where a yayin nesach is asur b'mashahu, right? That is only for actual yayin nesach, but not for stam yenam. In other words, the one that's present for him. The re there you'll see who says no, it really applies to everything. But today, because it's not so common for people to actually libate, we can be matir, right? So it's exactly that gap, just like at the beginning of the Masechta, where the Re says, no, lichora it applies to everything, but, if we don't do business with them, they're going to hate us, and therefore we can't do it. So that kind of gap, again, they agree on the bottom line, they agree but for Rabbeinu Tam, it's like inconceivable that our practice will deviate from the Gemara, and therefore the Gemara is going to mean something else. So that's, there's more to say about that, obviously, and people have written about this, but that is, I would say on the halacha side. On the Gemara side, I think that this Masechta is very, very interestingly marked by agadot or agadita in a number of different ways, and that they relate to each other. And I know, obviously Daf Ayin Vav is a few days away, but I do want to end there. I think it is worth looking at the last one. But before we get that, right, if we recall, and I know at Daf Yomi speed, remembering anything is impossible. So, don't feel bad. As I said, I spent a lot of time with this Masechta, so I feel I know it differently. I can't learn Daf Yomi, it's too quick. But the Masechta opens, right, with a sort of interface between Jews and non-Jews in Atid Lavo, right, in the end of days, right, and it comes this scene of sort of the end of days, Yavo Goyim V'Ya'idu, right, because it's playing on the word Lifnei Eidehem before there. It's a funny word. It means like witness or holiday or something like that. So the Gemara then has this like long like two daf agadita where it sort of describes how the end of days will happen, and that all the Goyim will come and testify about the Jews, whether the Jews did or didn't keep the halacha, right? Starting with Nimrod and then about Abraham, and then Nebuchadnezzar and all sorts of people. And then there's this whole discussion, well, did the Jews do it? Did they not do it? Are they better than the non-Jews? Are they not better than non-Jews? The theme of, and one theme that kind of runs, and I say this because it's just noticeable, the theme of prostitutes sort of shows up a lot in this Masechta, both at the beginning, we'll see here at the end also, and like, is there really a difference between Jews and non-Jews? Is there not? And then the kind of Gemara sort of goes back and forth, and then it says, well, what about Sukkah? And God's like in this idea, God gave Sukkahs to everybody, but the non-Jews said it was too hot. And therefore they kicked the sukkah and left. And the Gemara says, but wait a minute, if it's too hot, Jews are also putter. And the Gemara says, yeah, but when they do that, they don't kick the sukkah. So at the end, like the difference might not be so big, right? It's just a little attitudinal. So that's sort of the opening agadita. Then if we think of the Mishnayos, there are three basic agadic Mishnayos in the Masechta. The first one is at one and they each, I think, mark a transition point in the Masechet. The first one is on Daf Chavtes at the beginning, basically when we transition from commercial transactions to food. And if you recall, there's this question of why is cheese of non-Jews asur? And the answer is, let's talk about Shir HaShirim. And, Shir HaShirim is the ultimate, change the topic. Now, there's like interesting questions to see because, of course, Shir HaShirim is full of imagery of wine and benotehem, right, and sort of intimate relationships, and maybe cheese and dvash and chalav and lechem, right, which actually does set the agenda for that. So I think there's some interesting things to say there, but fundamentally, it's an agadic Mishnah, which are not super common, that deals there with two rabbis talking about the relationship between non-Jews, or Jews and non-Jews, and the answer is not straightforward. And that's at transition 1 of the Masechta, from the commercial relations to the food. The next Haggadik Mishnah, probably the most famous one, this is the kind of Mishnah, if it wasn't written, someone would have to write it, right? Rabban Gamliel in the bathhouse with either a philosopher or some, Roman sort of upper class person. Okay, he's an Aphrodite's bath. Lots have been written about this, right? This famous line, Hiba bigvuli, ani lo bati bigvuleha, right? She came in my domain, I didn't come in her domain, so whose domain is this? What's the rabbi doing in the bathhouse? But interestingly, there we have an interaction between Rabban Gamliel and some non-Jewish intellectual. And if you recall, the Gemara says in 4 different ways, tshuva genuva nasarlo. In other words, that the dialogue between Rabban Gamliel and the non-Jew is sort of inauthentic, right? He didn't give him the real answer. Then the Gemara tries to tease out what the real answer is, what it should have been, etc., etc. So there too, I think this is reminiscent of the first Agadita, where there's this conversation that's not wholly authentic, but this is another inflection point in the Masechta, because this is right where we change from food to objects, right? As you guys all know, now that you've learned it, Masechet Avodah Zara is not about what most people think Avodah Zara is, right? There's not so much, there's about 10 daf about actual things of Avodah Zara, right? Most of it, I think I said this, when we talked last time, the Rishonim call it Masechtas Goyim, because it's really about the relationship with non-Jews, and even that stuff is really about the relationship with non-Jews and their objects. But anyway, the second Aggadic Mishnah comes at the second transition point, where we move from food to things. And we move from sort of kashrus and quasi-kashrus problems to the Isser Hana of actual Avodah Zara objects. Then there's a third and final Aggadic Mishnah, which appears at the end of that section before we transition into the last thing, which is really about Yayin Nesach. And that is, again, Rabban Gamliel, again with these intellectuals of the Umot HaOlam, right, of the Chachmei Rome, again, a sort of philosophical discussion. If anyone wants, when we learned this first, we did a shir on this. I think it's one of sort of analyzing the Agadita literarily. If you can, Gary Dana can send me an email, if anyone who wants, I can send you the recording. But there too, what's interesting is that the Gemara basically says Rabbi Gamliel also did not have a fully authentic conversation with the Chachmei Romi, because the Gemara then says, well, here's what he should have said, here's what he should have said, here's what it was. And that is at the inflection point where we're done with the Avodah Zara, meaning the objects, and we move now to Yayin Nesach. There's, of course, one more story reminiscent of all of these, which is the sort of mind-blowing story of Rava and Bar Shishak, right? The sort of mobster figure who's sitting there in his hot tub, surrounded by, the women accompanying him, and Rava walks in, and there they again engage in some philosophical discussion. There again, the Gemara sort of critiques what Rava said and what he should have said. So this theme is sort of like over and over and over again. And then, as was pointed out, the last part goes sort of back to Yayin Nesach, but somewhat different than the first part, which the first part is typically wine of Goyim, right? Just like the Chalav Shel Akum, the Gvina Shel Akum, the Pas Akum, the Shemen Akum. So, and here it's really Jewish wine. The question if non-Jews touch it. As was mentioned, this part of the Masech, that last part, is very, very case-driven, both in the Mishnah, right? Zemaisa, 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 and in the Gemara, there's very few Brightos, right? Very few Mishnayos cited, and then this case had happened here, this case had happened here, this case happened here. Some of them very hard to understand, some of them straightforward, very hard to figure out the rules, and really the halacha, the Rishonim have to piece it together. I do want to mention, if everyone remembers, because it'll come up here at the end, the estrog case, right? Where there's an estrog that falls into a barrel, some non-Jew kind of sticks his hand to save it, and then they say, well, you got to hold his hand and like drain the thing. Okay. So with all that, I want to come to the very end of the Masechta, because I think it references almost all these themes. right? The themes of the non-Jews, assumption about how Jews do and don't keep halacha, right? That showed up a lot in the last couple dapin about, the guys on the boat. He goes at Shabbos. Is he going to come back? Is he not going to come back? Right? The question, of course, about male gender relationships shows up a lot. The question about the sort of non-Jewish potentates and how they relate to the Jews, and ultimately, as I said, these are assumptions about assumptions about assumptions. There's rabbis making assumptions about what non-Jews, assumptions about how Jews keep halacha, right? Which is a very consistent theme throughout the Masechta. So it's like an infinite mirror. So maybe we'll just look at the very last Gemara here, which interestingly brings all this together. So the story here, and you haven't done it yet, the very last dap, and actually shift topic a little bit to sort of kashrus and kashrus adjacent things, particularly the idea that when we buy kalim from avodah from non-Jews, they have to be toveld, right? So there's sort of like three potential problems, right? There's the kashrus problem, right? That the dishes we're using have to be kashered. There is the then there's the sort of basar v'chalav sort of problem, or possibly like that. Those are related. Then there's the tuma problem, right? It might be tameh needs to be purified. And finally, there's this sort of idea that that the kalim themselves need some sort of process, which is why we take our glasses and whatever to the mikvah. So the last thing in the mission is about the knife, and the knife has weird rules. Halachically, exactly what's going on here is a little complicated, but let's just read it more in the Agadic phrase that it comes. So the very end here, Amar Rabbi Ukva Bar Chama.
I pulled it up. We have it in front of us. Okay.
Great, even better. Thank you. Okay, Amar Rabbi Ukva. So hasakin, so the knife. So the Mishnah says shafa v'hi tahora, right? You kind of scrape it, and then it becomes tahor. No, you're there.
I'm there. Okay.
You're there. You're perfect. So Amar Rav Ukva Bar Chama v'noatza asara pamim b'karka. So you like dagger it 10 times in the ground. Okay. Amar Rav Huna Breder Rabbi Yeshua v'karka she'ena avuda. Right, and meaning hard ground, so that it kind of gets a good kind of scraping. Okay, and Amar of Kahanu v'sakin yafa she'ein bagumos. Okay, so it has to be a knife that doesn't have ridges, so that it can like get, it sort of contact with the ground is sort of like shaking it off. So Tanina Mehachi, we learn similarly, sakin yafa she'ein bagumos no it's asarim bakarka. Okay, and then Rav Huna adds, Amar Rav Huna Breder Yeshua le'echol botzone. This helps for cold. Okay, so this is where halachically, like exactly what's happening here is not super clear, because if it's only for cold, so this is just a form of cleaning it. So maybe like knives need to be, right, they didn't have soap exactly, so maybe like knives need to be cleaned like extra special good. And therefore, like the stabbing it in the ground is sort of doing that. So that's sort of where this comes from. Why in our world this doesn't happen so much, because we say you wash it with like hot water and soap, and that's fine. Yardana, can you scroll a little further? Okay. All right. Now, ki ha demar Yehuda uvati bartovi. So just like this story, where two people, Mar Yehuda, who is sort of a rabbinic figure, and Bati Bartovi, who's a Jewish figure, we'll see exactly who he is, Havayatve Kamei de Shvur Malka. So they sit in front of Shvur Malka or King Shapur. So again, we're going to end with one of these scenes that we've seen many of, like Jews in front of some either non-Jewish king or bigwig or something like that. Now, Aitula Kamei Etroga. So they bring before him an etrog. Now, this to me was interesting, because etrogs are not like super, they're obviously associated with sukkahs. It's super common in their world either. And this only appears one other time in the Masechta, right? And like in Chazal, like etrogs appear a lot in the Zech Sukkah and not elsewhere. So it's kind of a strange thing to bring. And clearly referencing that other story. Pasik ve'apil. So he takes his knife and he cuts and he eats. And then pasek ve'havle lebati bartuve. And he cuts another piece and he gives it to Bati Bartuve. And then hadar datsa asara zimne ba'ara. and then he like stabs it 10 times in the ground, and Pasek and Havle the Mar Yehuda. And then he cuts and gives a piece to Mar Yehuda. So Amr Le Bati Bar Tuve. So Bati Bar Tuve, with the guy who got the first piece before he koshered it, we'll say, Vahu Gavra Bar Yisrael. Who he says, what? I'm not Jewish. I'm like a firm guy. How come you treated me differently? So Amr Le Mar Kimle Begave Umar Kimle Begave. How they translate this here? Can you scroll it up a little bit? So he says, about you, I said, I'm certain. He says, I'm certain about one master, but I'm not certain about another master. Meaning, and we'll see in a second how Rashi explains this, like, I kind of know that for Mar Yehuda, I got a kasha eye. For you, I'm less sure. So Ikeda Amri, another thing, says, my Itkar, my Avdadet Be'urta. I remember remember what you did last night. Okay, so what's that? So they were clearly staying at his house, and Rashi explains that the Persian custom was to send, female accompaniment to the guests, and Bati Bar Yehuda accepted this, and Mar Yehuda did not. Okay, and that's sort of the end of the story. Now, what to me is interesting here is just how much, and you can take it down now, and that's how the Masechta ends. Just how many themes that are throughout the Masechta kind of all come back here, right? We have the Jews in front of the Jewish potentate, right? We have the assumptions that, interestingly, non-Jewish assumptions about Jewish halacha keeping, are important. And it's not, so, and therefore, like, right? We also have, again, the idea of when you're in a non-Jewish world, so znus, right, is sort of rampant and everywhere, comes back. And also this idea, right, of who's watching who. Now, this goes to me all the way back to the opening Agadita, where the non-Jew is testifying on the sort of Jewish halacha keeping. Now, what to me is interesting is this at the end, sort of the beginning, it talks about a sort of messianic or end of days theory when God will sit on his throne and everyone will judge. But what the Gemara is ending with was, you know what? But here too, right? In our world where you're not, you're just in front of Shvur Malka, like these things here. So I thought that was like super interesting how really the Agadot frame this Masechta and really present its themes, sometimes in very similar ways, sometimes very different way, but here, and bring back that estrog, right, which shows up in the Ayin Nesach Sige, which is sort of this, it's like super interesting. I don't have like everything worked out, but it's clear that this is like recurring back on these themes and really saying like, if the Masechta open this messianic scene, this ends in like, I think like Yardena or Anna, I can't remember who was talking, said at the beginning of like, well, how do we live in the world, right? And, for those of you in Israel, it's a little bit different. For those, right? Like, we've all been there where like people watch what we do and will reflect back to us that which we do, even if they're not Jews and even if they're not halachically sophisticated, right? So, whatever it is, when you maintain a standard and present yourself a certain way, people will respect that. And when you've been, and we've all been, on each side of this, I'm not here to give very musser, but I find it like fascinating that that's the like mic drop of this Masechta, that like, God's watching, but the non-Jews are watching too, and you want to pay attention to that. So that's what I got. Maybe just a second on Maseches Harius. Very short, as was mentioned, super interesting. When people or students ask me like, where does the Talmud discuss legal theory? And I said, watch the sacrifices. And like one of the most fascinating things to me is at Harius, which is really about a very, very obscure and particular type of korban, really is where the Mishnah and then the Gemara gets into core legal theory questions about what makes the Sanhedrin right. Is it right? Are they, right because they're final? Are they final because they're right? What are the duties of dissenting opinions? What is one's obligation to dissent? What is one not? Lots of stuff buried in a kind of very technical discussion that is really the bridge between, and maybe it's the other way to think about it, the bridge between Nezikin and Kudshim, which we're going to next. Harius is really mediating that boundary, bring those two together, but in some sense, offers like the legal theory that animates Nezikin throughout, refracted through a Kachim lens. So that's where you're headed to next.
Thank you so much, and what a great read on these stories. Anybody have any comments, thoughts that they want to share? You can just unmute yourself. I thought that framing of those those Agadah missions was fabulous. And if you could send me that article, that would be great, because I'll send that out to everybody with the
It's a
report.
recording, so I'll send you the link to the recording and the source sheet.
Okay,
Written it
great.
up. I'd like to, but
Fabulous.
right now it's a recording.
Okay. Anyone have any questions, thoughts they want to share about the Masechet? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mona, go ahead.
As I was reading this Masechet, it really was stirring in my mind the question of how we look at non-Jews, our relationship with non-Jews, trust, do we trust them, how they look at us. It was all over the Masechet. And in the world we're living in right now, it is so powerful a question. I just want to register that and register my intense discomfort at our world today, and both in Israel and in the States and around the world with anti-Semitism, and just register that this is an age-old issue and it feels very relevant today.
Yeah, Mona, I would agree. That to me was a huge takeaway of this Masechet. Like, I wonder what it would have been like to learn this Masechet 5 years ago. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Cindy wrote here, thank you for an elegant literary and halachic intertwining. What a great reading. Thank you. Okay. All right. So with that, I guess Professor Salmon finished up the Masechet itself, actually, so we don't need to do it, right? So Hadron alach hasocher tapoel usilkalach Masechet Avodah Zara. We have finished this Masechet together. I know we're going to actually finish it on Tuesday together. And again, I hope this, Anne and I keep saying this is a Masechet that we will definitely be coming back to again. I definitely would want to learn this more in depth and not in the Daf Yomi pace. And you're going to finish up with the Hadron.
I'm going to say the Hadron, but if you haven't finished, and when you do finish on Tuesday, I guess, right? So then, feel free to say it again. Hadron alach Masechet Avodah Zara v'Hadron alach. Datan alach Masechet Avodah Zara v'Tan alach. Lo nitnesei minach Masechet Avodah Zara v'lo titnesei minan lo ba'alma adin v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yehi ratzon lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'lo yivasenu shetehei toratcha u'monatenu ba'olam hazeh u'tehi imanu le'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa, Harevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu ובפי עמך בית ישראל ונהיה אנחנו צאצאינו וצאצאי צאצאינו עמך בית ישראל כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה מאויבי תחכמנו מצוותיך כי לעולם היא לי יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך ולמען לא אבוש לעולם לא אשכח פקודיך כי בם חייתנו ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך אמן 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 סלע ועד מודים אנחנו לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המדרש ולא שמת חלקנו מיושבי קרנות, שאנו משכימים והם משכימים, אנו משכימים לדברי תורה והם משכימים לדברים בטלים, אנו עמלים והם עמלים, אנו עמלים מקבלים שכר והם עמלים ואינם מקבלים שכר, אנו רצים והם רצים, אנו רצים לחיי עולם הבא והם רצים לבאר שחת, שנאמר ואתה אלוהים תרדם לבאר שחת, אנשי דמים ומרימה לא יחצו ימיהם ואני אבטח בך. יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהי כשם שעזרתנו לסיים מסכת עבודה זרה, כן תעזרני להתחיל ממסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, וזכות כל התנאים והמורים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לי ולזרי, שלא תמוש התורה מפי ומפי זרי וזרע זרי עד עולם, ויתקיים בי בתהלכך תנחה אותך בשכבך תשמור עליך והקיצותה היא תשיחך, כי בי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים אורך ימים בימינה ובשמאלה עושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז עמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. We will see you in 2 weeks, God willing. And looking forward to see all of you again soon.
Thank
And
you
again,
all.
we just want to wish a full refuah to Claire, to my mother, and hope everybody remains well.
Refuah Shlema to your mother, Yardena. Thank you both for
Thank you.
doing this, despite all the challenges that are going on in your lives. We're very grateful. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good 2 weeks, everybody.